You have lived in China for nearly 30 years. Why haven't you been the subject of your interview?
It's not so much that they're questioning me, and it's an exchange of views, more or less. I blame them what's happening in Europe, in Germany, and I have questions to understand why and what they are doing in China. It's kind of an exchange relationship of information and views, and actually I learn a lot in switching the perspective and try to see the world through the eyes of Chinese people, but also the Chinese government. And probably we have to get used to switch perspectives because now there's a new world order coming up, a multipolarian world order, where the minority of the West will be not able anymore to set the rules for the majority of the world, but the majority of the world, which is basically led by the BRICS countries, want to decide themselves. And since last year, BRICS is economically stronger than the old traditional G7 countries, and there are 4 times more people living in these countries. So by any means of our values, of the values of majorities should have a saying, they are gaining pace and they are gaining influence, and therefore we need to listen more careful to them, because the biggest problems we have, like digitalization, like climate change, like ending the war in Ukraine and ending other wars, making sure that the world is becoming more stable again, we only can solve these problems together with countries like China, India, and Brazil. And therefore, I spend a lot of time to understand why they're doing things, how is their perspective. And most time of my work I spend then to explain it to the Germans and to the Europeans. It does not mean that I totally agree to everything, what they're doing and what they are aiming to, not at all. But it's very important to understand it, because only if you understand your competitor or even your partner, you can develop the right strategy to make sure that your own ideas, your own goals, your own values will play an important role in the new multipolarian world. And in this perspective, I think we still have a lot to do in Europe. We still need to build up our China knowledge. It is not sufficient anymore to just say, no, we don't care what they want. We know what we want, and what we want will become reality, will become the rules of the next generation. These times are over. These times this was the case for about the last 300 years. And now we need to see how we can convince these countries about our values, our ideas, and we cannot force them anymore. That's a big difference.
And in correlation to the previous question, if your story were added to the new supplement of the book, what experience would you mainly tell?
My biggest experience about the book is basically that we still underestimating the innovation strengths of China. China used to be one of the most innovative countries until the beginning of the 19th century, and they basically want to go back to the position, to the level of innovation they have been before, and they are on a good way to achieve it. At the beginning of the 19th century, they had about 30% share of the world economy. Now it's 18. So within the next 1 or 2 decades, they're going to reach this kind of share, and then they are back on the same level. So we shouldn't underestimate China. That's actually our biggest mistake. That was our biggest mistake in the last 30 years. I still remember when we were all saying in Europe, the Chinese, they're not innovative. They only can copy our products. And this is now proved to be untrue in very central areas like e-car and autonomous driving, like drones, like artificial intelligence. The Chinese are already leading the world in development, and this is actually only the beginning. So we have to look more closer, more intense to the developments in China.
And in China, especially Beijing, there have always been many foreign journalists stationed there, but
Yes.
you are one of the few, if not the only one, active in the news and media industry for 30 years. So being a journalist in China for many years, have you been prevented from interviewing anywhere? Are there any reported topics that are prohibited?
Mainly if you, there are actually even a few guys that are longer in China. Even there's one German, which is 1 year longer in China, one German journalist. So there are a few, but they're getting less and less, it's true. And they going into different jobs. The former bureau chief of CNN was in Beijing for more than a decade. He's now the ambassador for the Philippines in Beijing. So they're still there, but they're in different jobs. There are definitely topics which is difficult to report on, but I have to say it's much easier for the foreign journalists than for the Chinese colleagues, because they really have tougher times than, let's say, 5 or 10 years before. For the foreign journalists, they also have problems, especially if they are only in China for a few years, even only 1 year, and then they don't know their way around. For me, it's a bit easier because I have after almost 30 years, I have a strong network of contacts. So I always find a way to get my information, and I know how to put the words that I can still criticize the Chinese government or developments in China without appearing arrogant or post-colonial. And actually, if you find the right tone, he's actually can accept much more criticism than you would expect at the first look.
And you have lived in China for nearly 30 years. Why haven't you been the subject of your interview? And to being a journalist in China for so many years, have you even been prevented or stopped from your reporting or shooting? Or in general, can you exercise the job of a journalist freely in China?
So it's actually, to be a journalist, it's tougher than 5 years ago, especially for my Chinese colleagues. The Western colleagues have a bit more space to move, but as well for the colleagues which are working in TV, and especially for the colleagues who are only there for a few years. They don't really know their way around. For them, it's quite difficult. For me, it's a bit easier because I'm around there for almost 30 years. I know a lot of people. I have ways to get my information. And I also have ways of being critical in a way which they can accept. And that's probably an advantage. After a while, you learn to be critical without any compromise. Just to say it in a different tone, or which is some strategy is quite good as well. If you saying, okay, they're not only disadvantages. First, you mention the advantages, and then you talk about the disadvantages. So it's more balanced. But then you still have clearly mentioned the disadvantage and the problems. So then actually it's more acceptable for the Chinese government. So for me, it's not such a big problem, but for Chinese colleagues, it's a big problem.
What comments did the local media and public opinion make on China? New Prime Minister Li Qiang, first official visit to Germany and France after taking office?
the people and the Chinese government, they are very much interested in doing business with Europe, with Germany, and with France. And not only business, but also they're interested to have closer relations. To answer the question why, it's very simple at the end of the day. They want a third player. They don't only want to depend on the confrontation between China and the United States. So that means for us, there's quite a bit of space to move, to get our ideas, our position, our values into the game. But therefore, we have to deepen the relations. I think if you cut off the relations, it's much more difficult for Europe to bring in its views and values into the new world order than if you have strong and trusted relations to China and other countries, where you can say, okay, now we did a favor for you, now you can do a favor for us, and we trust each other, we explain our problems or our values, and probably can convince them even of certain values. That's much more time consuming and difficult than forcing them. But the times where we could force China to do what we want, these are probably forever over.
So you will continue to live there?
I'm a China specialist. I still think it's very, very interesting to understand how and why and in which direction this new world power is developing. And therefore, I'm still not bored, and I'm pretty optimistic that I will not be bored in the next 10 years as well.